Warning, this is an integrity-based podcast.
If you're expecting a bunch of guru fluff and get-rich-quick garbage, you've come to the wrong place. This show is the no bullshit real deal.
No bullshit real deal.
I'm Larry Harbolt, and they call me the real deal. Welcome to my show. This show is aimed at providing you with quality information so you can make more profit in the fastest way possible without making costly mistakes from the deals you do.
Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Today I wanted to talk about something that I think is very important that I keep hearing about from students. And I have to ask the question, are you running your real estate business like a business? Because if you're not, this is a podcast you definitely want to listen to more than once. You know, I've talked about this subject many times before, but because of this recent call from one of my students, I felt it very, very important to talk about this subject again. This is a story I've heard all too many times, and it is a problem with most people just getting started in the real estate business. So let me explain what my student said to me, because many of you have experienced the same thing. Okay, a few days ago, she called me and told me she was facing a great dilemma in her life, and she was worried about losing her property. And I said, why are you losing your property? She said, well, she had no money to pay for the annual property insurance that was coming due, and she had 2 years of unpaid property taxes that were coming due. She had no money to pay them. She didn't have the money to pay for either. Now, this seemed to be a common problem many beginning investors are experiencing because they don't know how to do what they need to do. They have no financial discipline. This is a subject that I personally knew all too well because years earlier, I experienced this very same problem. So I've got lots of background on it, and I can tell you, you need to make some changes if this is your problem. Now, my own personal story, it's a common one. First, when I first started in the business, buying income properties, nobody told me that each property was a separate business. When you buy real estate, if you're buying income properties, you have to make sure that each property is a business unto itself. If that property can't pay for the property and all the expenses from the rent received, you can't afford that property. Nobody told me that each property must pay for itself from the rent income it produced, or it wasn't a good property to buy. And nobody told me that I must set aside money from the rent for the property taxes each month, for the property insurance, and for the maintenance of that property to be able to fluff and repair that property when a tenant moved out. That is a critical part of this whole process that you definitely need to think about. Now, owning several income properties, at that time, you see, I'd collect the rent each month, I'd pay the mortgage payment, then use whatever money remained to live on. That's how I survived. But this strategy worked well for a while until the property insurance and the property taxes came due, and I had no money to pay for either because I'd spent all the excess money each property was producing just to live on. I thought that's what I was supposed to do, is live on that excess cash flow. But you see, when this happened, I started borrowing money that I needed from friends when a tenant moved out so I could repair the property until the next tenant was in place and paying rent. It worked well until the property taxes and insurance were due, and I had no money to pay for either one of them. So I know that because I had to start borrowing money for the property insurance, property taxes, I did that until I no longer had any equity remaining in my properties, and nobody would lend to me any more money. That was simple because they saw me as someone on a fast-sinking ship, and they wanted no part of that, and I don't blame them. It was not the best path that I followed. But this is when I had my aha moment, and I finally realized I had a serious problem I needed to get a grip on fast. I could no longer borrow money, and I feared losing my properties and ruin my name with the lenders who had trusted me and allowed me to borrow money from them. And that's very, very critical. You definitely don't want your lenders upset with you. You have to keep them paid. And if you don't pay the insurance or the taxes, they're going to get cross with you. And they're not going to like it because they're not protected if you don't. Okay, now back to my student with the problem. Once she explained her problem, I made some suggestions based on my own personal experiences. What I suggested was she do exactly what I did when things were the very worst for me. I told her to go to her local bank, open up a checking account. Then every month, when each tenant pays their rent, deduct from the rent 1/12 of what the annual property taxes cost are, and deposit that money into the checking account. Also, deduct from the rent 1/12 of the cost of the annual property insurance for each property, and also deposit that. Also start setting aside each month at least 10% of the monthly rent to cover the cost of repairing that problem when a tenant moves out, and also deposit that amount into the checking account. That way, when a tenant moves out, you have got the money in hand to do the work you need to do to paint, replace carpet, whatever, but you must set that aside. And something else I do is I set aside an additional 5% of the monthly rent for when a tenant moves out, I would have at least 1 month's worth of money after 12 months to make a mortgage payment while the property is being fixed and until I had another tenant in place paying rent. That one is very important. I used to do all the others, but when I started putting that extra 5% aside, that way I never have to come out of pocket, because usually I can get a tenant out as long as I'm not evicting them. If a tenant moves out, I can go in, I can fix the property, and I could get a new tenant in, usually in 30 days. But because I set aside 5% of the rent, I had, if not enough, I had almost enough money to make the mortgage payment while it was sitting vacant. Believe me, when I finally started doing this, my monthly spendable cash flow greatly diminished. Believe me, it went down. But when these expenses came due, I had the money I needed available to immediately pay for those items. That was the key. Too many people collect the rent, make the payment, live on what's left. And it's going to be a seminar coming your way that you don't want to take, believe me. I see people that come to my weekly real estate meeting. They'll pitch a property. They'll offer it to the people in the room. I've got a property. It rents for $1,000 a month. You can make the payment on it, which is $600. That gives you $400 cash flow every month. Well, that's ridiculous. That is not true numbers. If you fall for that, you're out of your mind, because that is not how you run the numbers on your properties. That is just ridiculous. You have these costs because there is property insurance, there is property taxes. You do need money so when a tenant moves out, you can fluff and buff the place before you get the new tenant in. I've never seen a tenant move out where you could lick the floors. I mean, it still needed some work. But at least you've got the money. And if you put all the money for each of these items into a checking account from all your properties, when these things come due, you have the money you need to pay these bills. Now, I hope my student has the financial discipline to do what I suggested, but only time will tell. I hope those of you who are just getting started as a landlord will heed my warning and immediately start setting money from every rent check aside to cover these costs. Believe me, when you start doing what I'm suggesting, you'll start sleeping better at night. How do you think I know that? I've had many sleepless nights wondering where I was going to get money when no one would lend to me, because I'd borrowed it and I'd lived on my excess cash flow. Not a good program. Don't get caught up in it. So, at that time that I had this problem, I didn't lose any of my properties, although I could have easily lost some of them. But I want you, or if you need more monthly cash flow to live on, may I suggest buy more well-selected income properties where the numbers work. I recently did a weekend seminar, and someone was saying how they lost money. They lost $5,000 on a deal, and they were complaining about it. And my solution was just go buy another house and flip it. Get your money back. It's a simple solution when you understand how this business works and what you can do to get the money you need. Because each income property you buy is a separate business. If each property can't generate enough rent each month to cover these costs and pay for the property, you can't afford the property either. Don't get caught up in that trap. That is why I've got to have terms on the property I buy, because if I go from price and we live off from an amortization sheet that tells me how much my payment is, many times after I deduct these costs, I'm going negative. I may not realize it, but when I deduct these costs from the rent, price is less relative unless I'm going to fix it and resell it when they'll need an appraisal. If I'm going to buy it long term, I'm not as concerned with price as I am with the monthly payment. So I deduct from the rent these costs, and when I deduct all of them and I deduct a cash flow that I want to put in my pocket, it tells me how much I have left every month to make a payment with. If I don't follow that formula, I'm going upside down. Slowly. I don't like that kind of a slow death. If I can't make that property pay for itself and a tenant can't afford the property, I can't either. So I wanted to go over this again because that student brought it to my attention, and this is something you have to be aware of. You have to start setting money aside every month to cover these costs. If you don't, like I said, you're going to take a financial seminar I don't think you really want to take. Get smart. Start setting these costs aside every month. Remember what they are. 1/12 of the annual property tax cost, 1/12 of the annual property insurance cost, if it's not taken out of the mortgage payment, 10% for a maintenance factor, 5% for a vacancy factor, so you've got money to make a payment. If you hire management, you've got to deduct another 10%. Then you want to make a certain amount, say $100, $200 a month cash flow. If you deduct all of that from what the property will rent for. Now, I'm not talking about the highest rent possible. I'm talking about a rent where a tenant will stay in the property because they feel it's affordable and it's well worth the money. Because you got to realize when a tenant moves out, you've got to fix the property. If a tenant moves every year, that's costly. So if you can get tenants to stay long-term, years, hopefully, you're going to save a lot of money because you don't have to fix it up every year and spend all that cash. So I want you to think about it. I base my numbers on what it'll rent for minus the cost, which tells me how much I've got left remaining out of the monthly rent to make a mortgage payment with. And so I cover my bases, I cover my ass, and I know how much I can afford each month. So remember, price or terms. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'll give you your price if you give me my terms, and that's what I'm talking about. Give them their price if they will take what you have left to make a payment with, if it's an income property. So, until my next podcast, for all your real estate information, please go to LarryHarbolt.com. And until my next podcast, this is Larry Harbolt saying good luck and happy investing.
Thanks for listening to the Real Deal Podcast with Larry Harbolt. To learn more about investing in real estate, head on over to LarryHarbolt.com and register for his educational tips and articles delivered by email.